Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to listen to our discussion on growth and scale. And as you probably know, FMA is also celebrating today, so hopefully you'll join us outside these doors afterwards as we celebrate the opening of our San Francisco office. So my name is Rebecca Coker. I'm the lead consultant for the West Coast FMA. And when I think about this event, there's just a lot of things that cross my mind. I think about growth and scale and what does that mean? And some of the words that come to my mind are excitement. Like it's so great that growth is coming. I can't wait for that to happen. But also when I talk about growth and scale, I think about change and a little bit more change. And we're fortunate here today to have this group of individuals who are going to share our story with us. They're going to share it with those of you that are here in the room in San Francisco, and then we also have people across the country listening in on this discussion so that they can adapt it to their organization and learn from what we'll hear today. Our discussion today will be led by Hilda Polanco, FMA's founder and CEO. Hilda is the perfect person to lead this discussion. She has not only with FMA partnered with numerous organizations on thinking about how to grow, how to scale, and how to do it successfully. But FMA is also in our 15th year, and we're growing. So I'd like to turn it over to Hilda, and thank you again so much for coming.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. I am really privileged today to be joined by a wonderful panel of experts. When we were thinking about this topic of growth and scale, we could have approached it in several different ways. And we thought one of the best ways to approach it was a conversation between funders and the grantees that they support. No one nonprofit organization can think about scaling impact without a partnership with the foundation or other funders. And no foundation or funder can really do this alone. So part of our theme today is a framework for the conversation, as well as what is that partnership between funder and nonprofit that really strikes a balance for success. So before I start some of my introductory comments, I do want to just briefly introduce the panel that's with me. And I'm going to start at the tail end. We have Andrew Niklaus, who is the Director of Impact and Evaluation for Tipping Point Community, a funder here in the Bay Area. And Andrew has worked with nonprofits for over 15 years with a focus on designing, implementing, and evaluating programs. So Andrew will be our resident evaluation expert on the panel. Sam Cobbs, to his left, is the CEO for First Place for Youth, an organization here in the Bay Area. And Sam is a national expert on the idea of on policy and advisory services, program design for at-risk foster youth. And First Place for Youth is a leading organization in that space. To my left, I have Dara Rose, Senior Program Officer for the Wallace Foundation. The Wallace Foundation is a national funder that works with their partner grantees in many different ways, one of which is scaling impact across the country. Dara has a prior life in leadership in the nonprofit sector, so she brings those two perspectives to bear today. We also have with us Lindsay Wood Jeffries. Lindsay Jeffries was expected here in person, but due to personal reasons was unable to join us. But you can see she is with us, and she will be participating in the panel.
Hi, everyone.
We're here to show that nothing will stop the press, and that technology can really bring us together. So for all of us that are here and those of us that are joining us via the video streaming, we thank the panelists. And just as we begin, I wanted to, before we actually begin the panel presentation, I wanted to share just a few thoughts. Like with any panel moderator, we do our research and we think about the topic and try and think of the best ways to structure the conversation. And I realized that on this topic of growth and scaling, when you look at the literature, I think the earliest article I saw was 2003, and then there's this gap. And between 2010 and 2014, there's been quite a bit written about the subject, about strategies for success. And in thinking about it, I wanted to give us a framework for how we would think about the conversation for today. So why go to scale? Okay. So I'm quoting someone who years ago basically said that nearly every problem has been resolved somewhere in this world. The problem and the frustration is that we can't always seem to replicate those solutions across other parts of the country because we don't know what those strategies were. So part of, I think, the message from me today and from what is out there in the literature is let's do more sharing about those success stories. Let's think about what is working, what isn't working, and how can we as a sector work to learn from each other. So when we think about why scale, the questions that come to mind are we want to spread impact, right? There's such a promise of greater outcomes. What if we could do more of what we're doing? What if we could reach that scale? What if we could take a model from this community and replicate it in another community? Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could take those lessons? What if we were a part of a larger network and we could maximize resources and we could leverage from those resources to produce even bigger outcomes? And lastly, what if through this scaling process we could create greater visibility for this cause? What if we could actually increase the outcomes to a much, much deeper scale? But those are our wishes. And so when I think about how can we, foundations and nonprofits thinking about this, how can we think about it in terms of focus areas? We at FMA try and address the very complex problems through very sort of practical approaches. So I've through the research and speaking to others and seeing what we have, what come to see in success, I've identified 4 areas, and I borrowed some knowledge from the Social Impact Exchange, which is a national organization bringing together funders who are interested in scaling resources. And by the way, all of today's materials plus the recorded event will be available to you for reference in the future. And so when I think about the scaling process and how we framed our panel today, there are 4 areas. And the first is about assessment. The concept of efficacy. Before we move forward with a scaling initiative, do we understand what our program is about? And do we understand what makes it special? And are we ready to go to scale? So that's the first phase of this evolution. Secondly, do we have a business model to actually bring this scale to reality? Do we have a strategy for growth? Is there a business plan? In the work that we do at FMA, here's where we see a lot of question around financial sustainability. Can this program in its expanded form actually be financially viable? So the business model is a key sort of second evolution, or the second stage to that. Then we believe we have a true program. We're ready for scale. We have a business model. What's the implementation plan? How are we going to roll this out on a either national basis or to a few other cities, or even deeper in our own community? And once we've done that, and we've tried, and we've implemented some rollout strategies, then what is the evaluation? I think one of the key messages you'll hear today is that it's not a one-time process, it's an evolutionary process, and the scaling and ongoing improvement is part of the process. And so when we think about what are the questions we should be asking ourselves, we'd like to share what these 6 questions are. So today's conversation and the panel itself is structured to answer these 6 questions. For you, if you're thinking about scaling, or if you're a funder in the room and you're thinking about how you can support your grantees, what are these 5 questions? So Are we ready for scale? Have we a logic model that is articulated, standardized? Is there a program that has fidelity? Have we understood which are the must-haves of our program? What is our secret sauce? And what is negotiable? What can we work with if we get to a community where it's not absolutely replicable exactly the way we have it today? There are the must-haves and there are the maybes. There's a question of culture. Are we ready to replicate our particular culture in a consistent way? Are there systems for key performance management? You'll hear data, and then you'll hear more data, and we might even talk about data before we leave. So, do we have a way to prove that this is more than a hunch, that this is actually going to happen? And are we thinking about replicating processes, or is it about impact? So these questions and several others in that area, you'll hear some great perspectives from today. So let's say we've made it through step one. We are ready for scaling. How will we do that? Will we be replicating based on numbers served, exactly the process that we have? Are we thinking about replicating ideas, more maybe nationally, with other partners, and not necessarily a very well-structured program? What's our strategy? Is it a combination of both? And so that's our second question. How is the strategy going to be implemented? Where will we be going? Which cities are we going to? We often work with organizations that are in this first, is it best to replicate next door? Because we can keep an eye on things and we can think about the replication stages much more carefully and more closely. Is it across the country? What are the right answers? And I think in some of the successful replications we've seen, these questions of the right city is not about what works for us as an organization, but which are the cities that need and that have a demonstrated interest in our program. So it's not about what do we think will work, but who's out there that really needs this service and that we can actually make an impact. Are there funders in that community that think this is needed? And are there communities that really have those critical non-negotiable elements? So those are some questions to support this decision of what city will we be going to. Could be an FMA conversation without question number 4, right? So what's the financial structure of this plan? Is there a financial model that has been tested? Is there a cost per unit? Do we know what it's going to cost? And from a very replicable place, do we know, is it going to be foundation partnerships? Is it going to be diversified funding? What is that magic formula for revenues and therefore the long-term sustainability of the program? How will we manage the multiple sites? As we see organizations getting beyond these first stages, there's lots of interesting challenges around the national office versus the local office. Who's fundraising and who's dedicating which resources and which one grows first and what's the right order. Lots of interesting questions, and where we've seen some organizations take a step back because that wasn't really well thought out is in this area of how do we take the quality and make sure that that's not jeopardized in any way by our replication in the field. And then lastly, this question of evaluation. We started question 1 with being ready for scale was that we had a logic model that was replicable. Well, question 6 is how will we evaluate that? Will we, is it starting and ending? Is it an ever-going process? And how will we, as an organization addressing a particular social challenge, how will we share those lessons with others? And today's program is about sharing lessons from some who are earlier in the process and from others who have been there, learned, done that, and are here to share it with you. So with these 6 key questions, we embark on the panel for today, bringing the expertise, again, of folks who have been in the nonprofit sector, have made the switch to funders, and we want to talk about a few sort of underlying questions within this sort of 6-question framework. So I am going to now begin the long-awaited part of the program. And I'm going to start by giving each of the teams. And the way we think about the panel is we have 2 teams, 2 partnerships. Tipping Point community has been a longtime supporter and funder of First Place for Youth, my team down on the end of the table here. And so we're going to hear about not only the individual nonprofits' ideas of why this topic is really so critical to our CEOs here, but why is it so critical to the funders? To my right here, I have the partnership of Dara from the Wallace Foundation and Lindsay in DC. Also a partnership that has worked together for several years. So remember, this is from the partnership perspective as well as individual funder and nonprofit. So Andrew and Sam, I'm going to let you guys just tell us a little bit about your partnership and about the organization First Place for Youth.
So thank you for having me and allowing me to participate today. And before I give you a little bit about our growth story and the partnership that we've shared with Tipping Point, let me say that as I look around the room, I wonder how it is that I am up here and a lot of my peers are actually listening to me. I got an email from someone yesterday that said, "I'm coming." I was like, well, you should be teaching it. And so what I said that to say, what I'm going to share with you today is essentially from the First Place perspective and what it is that we have learned about our experience. It doesn't mean that this is the right way to do it. It is just the way that we have chosen to do it based on what we learned, and we don't have all of the answers. So I just really want to start there. And so the First Place was founded really about 17 years ago by two public policy students who really had the goal of understanding the issue of what happens to young people who are transitioning out of foster care and finding a solution for that at the policy level, because they really believe that it was federal policy and local and state policy that actually created and sustained the issue that they were trying to solve and cared so deeply about. I came to the organization about 9 years ago, almost to the day, and at that time the organization had what it considered was a pretty aggressive growth plan. It was going to go from serving about 300 young people a year in life touch services to about 500 young people a year. And it was going to go from housing about 40 young people to housing about 60 young people. And it was going to take us 5 years to actually do that. And so with my first hire, we came in and we said, well, that doesn't seem very aggressive to us. But the key thing is that we understood that in order to grow, that there were several things that needed to happen. And so 9 years later, at that time we were about a $1.4 million organization, had 17 staff people. Today we have a budget of about $16 million. We have well over 100 staff people, and we're serving young people throughout the state of California. And so one of the early partnerships that we had in that work was the Tipping Point community. And I remember the day that Daniel and Jean came over. And I like to say that they funded us. We were like their second grantee. They funded us before they had a website or we had a website. And so one of the things that I will share about the partnership, and I know we will talk more about this, that I feel like that we have learned together. We have tested and piloted things together. Funders don't always want to hear what's going right. They also want to hear what's going wrong. And what has been very interesting is that Tipping Point has always been willing to share its growing pains. And so I think a lot of times foundations seem like they're all buttoned up and they have it all together. And what that tells you is that money won't solve the issue, because if it did, they got all the money. And so there are some other key adaptable issues that you have to face as you're thinking about this growth.
I want to echo Sam's comments that, again, what we're going to share from the perspective of Tipping Point is that we're an organization that takes on the stance of we're always in learning mode. And in all clarification, I actually was that first hire, so I come from that, and it wasn't aggressive enough. So I think that I come from the perspective of having spent 6.5 years inside First Place during that growth, and it informs the work I do every day at Tipping Point extremely. So scale and growth and replication are words I think are used quite a bit. And just to create a little bit of clarification on those three, they're not the same. And growth is about growing your organization. You might grow the numbers served, you might grow your knowledge, you might grow your impact. Ideally, you're growing your impact. When you understand what that impact is and what's a smart way to grow, you think about replication. We can take this across the bay, we can take it across the bridge, we can take it to the state next door. But when you do that, and this was certainly the case at First Place, you run a very lean ship. You're not running at scale. You are piecemealing things together. And one of the really great fun pieces about working at a foundation like Tipping Point is we really want to be part of that process all the way. And with that kind of thinking, scale is important. There are many, many paths to get out of poverty. And organizations that can grow and can scale and reach big impact are definitely in our portfolio, and we will continue to fund them. We also know that there are organizations that are going to grow, but they might not replicate to other parts of the state or the nation or even the county. But they're a smart, clever, well-run organization that meets a really important regional need, and we fund them too. So the tie that binds that all together is this idea that, and Hilda touched upon it, if you're going to replicate or grow or even stay a really smart, clever regional organization, it's one thing to say we have impact, 80% of this, 75% of that. But if you don't know how you reach that impact, if you don't know why that impact is important for your specific target population, then you're growing for the sake of growth, and I know that there are pressures for people in this room and listening to grow because funders want you to grow. More numbers, more numbers, more numbers. And we'll talk more about this, but growth for Tipping Point is about numbers, of course. The problem of poverty is intractable. You need to reach large numbers. But the growth of your impact is what is most interesting to us. And how can we begin to balance that tension for folks is at the central part of the work that we do. Yeah.
Lindsay? Hi, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me via Skype. I'm really interested in this conversation. I've already learned some new things from the panelists. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah. Yep.
Good. So hello. I am delighted to be joining you, and as Sam said, it is a bit surreal sharing our experience. I'm eager to learn from others. So a little bit about Higher Achievement's history and how we got from here to there. So Higher Achievement was founded actually almost 40 years ago in Washington, D.C., out of the vision of a young teacher at a local high school who saw the achievement gap in action, saw across the street a public housing development where students had very limited opportunities, and inside his private school, really excellent opportunities for students. And he saw the inequity there, wanted to do something about it. Fast forward 30 years, and we were serving about 300 students in Washington, D.C., and had grown here and there, had contracted and grown over time, and yet there was some really promising evidence of impact. And we were beginning a randomized controlled trial study, which was actually just published last year. And national foundations and others were really asking us about what is our growth plan outside of Washington. And we wanted to thoughtfully consider that. And so in 2006, we were an organization of about a $900,000 budget with about 16 staff members. I was actually the 16th member of staff. I had served as a mentor for 5 years previously. And it sounds like there's some a tradition here on this panel of flip-flopping between the foundation world and the nonprofit direct service world. And I had been a program officer at a foundation, and after my mentor experience came to join Higher Achievement staff in 2005. But at that point in 2006, we were working with Bridgespan to test the feasibility of Higher Achievement's growth and look at different governance models. And we decided to grow as a wholly owned organization. The first site outside of DC was Higher Achievement Baltimore in 2009, after really investing amply in systems and infrastructure in 2007 and 8. In 2011, we opened in higher achievement Richmond. In 2012, we opened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Today, in 2014, we're about a $7 million organization with about 60 staff full-time. We serve students across those 4 cities. And as you'll learn as we dive into this, in 2011 and 12, we were really facing some serious challenges that we partnered very closely with Dara and the team at the Wallace Foundation to grapple with and turn the corner towards financial sustainability. We made a lot of tough choices and really made substantial investments in systems to make sure that our growth going forward is very sustainable. The goal coming out of the Bridgespan work in 2006 was to be in 10 cities by 2017, defining scale at about 500 students in a city. Our growth work now is really within our 4 cities over the next year and a half now in our current strategic plan, a year and a half left in that, and it's to go deep in those cities and to make a very substantial impact for middle school students. Our program is intensive. It adds up to about 100 extra school days per year during the after school and summer hours. And so it's a very intensive sort of disruptive change model for middle school students during that very critical transition. So I'll pause there, look forward to diving in more and hearing Dara's perspective.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me in the Bay Area. It's really wonderful to be here today in the sun. Just beautiful. We started investing in organizations like Higher Achievement in 2009 because we were really compelled by the evidence of a problem, summer learning loss, and also strong evidence in possible solutions for that problem. We commissioned Child Trends to do some research that's on our website, and looked at those programs that they had identified that had undergone rigorous evaluations, that had academic outcomes as their goal, and had evidence of success. We decided we want to focus on K-8, and we wanted to see who was still operating of those organizations that had been evaluated. So the sample size had started from like 83 to 24. We ended up funding 3 organizations, Higher Achievement being one of them, and we've supported them about almost 4.3 million since 2010. And the supporting of these leading providers so that they were able to withstand the recession, grow thoughtfully, and really ensure quality was a complementary investment strategy to another scale strategy, which was to partner with school districts. So we've been working with school districts also since 2010 to really see if they too can run comprehensive, holistic summer learning programs with quality and meaningful impact. So that initiative, that district initiative, has a random control trial going on with a RAND corporation. So that's kind of a proving concept. There wasn't a whole lot of evidence that districts could run holistic, full-day programs like the ones. So we were doing both, funding both nonprofits and districts. So that's why we started funding Higher Achievement. I should say though, like Tipping Point, we are a learning organization, and our institution's theory of scale is actually less about funding replication and kind of general operating grants, and really our bread and butter is the distillation of knowledge and the diffusion of knowledge. That is our fundamental theory of scale.
Thank you. Thank you all. Can you see why we're in for a real treat? Okay, so I've prepared a few questions based on I think some of the topics that we see come up often, and I'm going to start with Sam and Andrew. And the question that I'd love for Sam to address is, as a CEO, and as you think about the deal breakers for this trajectory, what are those must-haves that as a CEO you would want other CEOs in the room and those listening to us nationally to think about when they think about this trajectory of scale? What do you have to do to get it right?
So there are a couple of things that a few things that I think I would share today around what it is that you need to know and you need to get right. The first thing is understand what your end game is. What is it that you're trying to do? What is the change that you're trying to impact? And what I mean by the end game is, at first place, our goal or our vision is to eliminate the disparities between young people who have been in foster care versus those young people who've never had a foster care experience. And so the way that we're planning to get to that level of scale and have that level of impact, and there are no boundaries or borders on that is really in our country, is not by directly serving 10,000 young people across our country. We understand that our end game is the same end game that our founders came up with in the beginning. It is changing what creates and sustains the problem, and that is where you have the largest level of impact in our country. And so understanding what is your end game? What is it that you're aiming for? Are you trying to serve 100 more kids just to serve 100 more kids? Great for those young people, but that is not a strategy that you should consider if you're thinking about going to scale. It is understanding what your impact is. For those organizations that say, hey, we serve 750,000 kids. Well, there are also 14 million kids who need your services. So are you really at scale? And so I think understanding what the end game is before you actually attempt this, because it maybe isn't about 750,000 kids. It's about how do you get to 14 million. The other thing I think you really need to understand is how do you get the right people on the bus? And I'm going to start with all people. From a staff perspective, how do you ensure that you are hiring the right people? I remember, really clearly a conversation Andrew and I had in a coffee shop where we said, why do all of the people that we want to stay go, and all of the people that we want to go stay? What's that about? and we started to really dig into what that was about. And at the end of this journey, and I will say it was at a journey, we didn't solve it at the coffee shop. We actually probably solved it about a year or so later, after we decided to bring in a director of talent management. And what he helped us understand is that we were really good at hiring for skill, but not very good at hiring for culture. When you are growing, when you are changing, when you're continuing to innovate, that takes a special type of person to work in and throughout your organization. I love when people say they are a learning organization. But what does that really mean? That if you're learning, then you're consistently changing. You're consistently adapting. You're not making changes after every strategic plan. You're making changes after a month, after 3 months, because if you're really looking at the data, you should continually be reacting and adapting to that data. There's only one foundation that I know of. Their theory of what the data is supposed to show always comes out the same. We don't have enough money to do that. So we're continually changing, and that takes a special type of person, from your receptionist to the people at the highest level of your organization. And it takes a special kind of board to ride that wave with you. And so as you think about how do you get the right people on the bus, and how are you making sure that everyone that you bring in has a level of alignment with where it is that you're trying to go. That was a really clear message that we learned, and we learned it, on some level the hard way. The other thing that I think is a necessity is that you, as the CEO, you have to have a hardcore number two. Even if you have a great team of people that on an organizational chart may be at the same level, you got to have someone that even with them that you have designated, I don't like to get hit by buses. I like to win the Powerball. And if I win Powerball and I don't show up to work tomorrow, who's in charge? Right? And so not only does that when that person is not in charge, but as Andrew would always say, you need to have, as the CEO, the rock that all things that are not moving in the right direction break upon. And you need to make sure that that person is getting up, and that team is getting up every day trying to be better than they were the day before. What that ultimately looks like in a working relationship is a very honest and open relationship. I hope I don't steal one of Andrew's points as being typical Andrew. He's jotted down mostly what he's going to say. But Andrew would always say, I need to feed Sam and give him information on a slow drip. I can't give it to him all at once, because if he gives it to me all at once, I am not equipped to go out there and do what it is that I need to do, because I don't do sales. I give people opportunity. I give people opportunity to invest in an organization that invests in young people. And if I think the ship is not right or is not being ran right, I am going to be internally, because that is not an opportunity that I'm giving people. That's a sham. And you need someone who thinks that way and creates that way. And if you don't have that person or those people, then you shouldn't really consider this.
Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.
Andrew, any thoughts on the must-haves for successful?
Well, I mean, he certainly painted an interesting picture of me, I guess. But a few things, and it aligns a lot with how Tipping Point thinks about this, and the idea of before getting into kind of the framework that we think about, the first thing that we're looking for is their alignment with values. Are you an organization? Are you a leader that is interested in the things that we think are also the levers that move poverty? If you're someone who, as a leader or an organization, is interested in data, but data is not a big thing for you, and data is just something you do because you have to do it, you're not going to be a good fit for us. It's not a value set that's going to work for Tipping Point. If you're an organization that believes that any old talent's going to get where you need to go, and really this is the CEO, my ship, and I'm running it, and it's my organization and my DNA, that's not going to work. You need to be able to really have a strong alignment with values, and that's really where Tipping Point begins to work. A lot of the way that we talk about the framework is in three big buckets: program design and strategy, talent, and performance management. There are other pieces as well that are part of the organizational excellence, back of the house, traditional things that are absolutely important. I do by no means mean to say that they're not important. Things that are fund development, finances, HR, administrative, good systems. They're absolutely part of good, strong organizational excellence. But if you're getting ready to scale and you want to really understand how it is that you're going to create impact someplace else, we believe strongly that you really need to focus on your talent, your performance management, and your program design and strategy. So to kind of pick up where Sam left off there from the scale perspective, if the problem is 100,000, and you have a model that's on the more expensive side, like First Place can sometimes have, 10,000 might be scale for you. 5,000 might be scale for you. Knowing what that is, what you're going to do when you get out there, before you get out there, is really, really important. I hear lots of people always say, well, we got to be strategic. You need to be strategic. Sam and I talk all the time about there's really only one strategy: deliver impactful programs. That's the strategy. Everything else is implementing towards that strategy, and people get caught up in, well, let's be really strategic about this and strategic about that. When you have a good strategy and program design, you understand what it is, but more importantly, you have a place to begin. Organizations can sometimes not know where to begin, and you oscillate between the fear and fear of doing nothing, and that doesn't work. You're not going to get your solution out there. The talent perspective, I couldn't underscore more. Absolutely important to have talent up and down the organization. It's important to have a strong leader with great vision, have a good, strong executive team. I would also make a really strong argument that you need implementers. You need people at the middle management level who can understand the strategy and then turn it into implementation. Because as we know, if you don't have implementation, you're just talking about it. And that won't work. Performance management is something that we're going to continue to talk about, I hope, extensively throughout the panel. And that's not just a database, that's a strong cornerstone. You need a good, strong relational database that captures data and allows you to do some analytics, of course. But what's also really important is that you have a good, strong system of using that data. You have a feedback loop. If you're asking people to put lots of information into your system, but you're never giving it back to them, that's not fair. because sometimes organizations are spending at the direct service level 6, 8, 10 hours a week putting data in. You got to put it into their hands, let them make decisions, and give people autonomy to make decisions as well.
Thank you. Thank you on that. And so moving us further into this idea of investments and approaches, I'm going to direct this question towards Darren. And over the years, I've learned that the Wallace Foundation invests for the long term with their grantees. And bringing successful programs from one community to the other is one of their strategies. So in terms of this concept of must-haves, I wanted Dara to share with us what does she, in the Wallace Foundation strategy, see as the must-haves for moving from one community into the next.
Everything that's been said, so ditto, ditto, ditto. So I'll focus on maybe 3 things that to add to the conversation about what really is important as you're thinking about investing or enacting a replication strategy at large scale. One is I've really come to appreciate our grantees' ability to toggle between fidelity and flexibility. As you grow, I think it's a really uncomfortable tension where you want to control because of your commitment to quality. And if you've been rigorously evaluated, the kind of fidelity thing has been indoctrinated into your bloodstream. But every community is its own community, and you have to allow for adaptation. So to Hilda's point earlier in terms of understanding what are the non-negotiables and where are the opportunities for localized innovation and really distributed leadership. And to your point about feedback loops, how is the quality assessment and improvement structure really responsive to ongoing feedback at all levels of the organization? That it's not just a periodic drive-by meeting with the CEO in the other city or a phone call with the board chair, but really genuine partnership and where you're going into communities with humility, understanding that you're not from there, you don't really know exactly how the program should be run. One of our grantees in Boston, Chris Smith from Boston After School and Beyond, he's an intermediary organization, and he came in right when the organization was in a real point of hardship and doing some soul searching. And he really maneuvered a lot of relationships that had become locked with some important leaders in the community. And after about 6 months, I asked him, Chris, how are you doing this? Like, what do you think is the 1 or 2 things that you've done that have really made a difference in the last couple of months? And he said, well, every day I ask myself, is what I'm doing something that no one else can do better? And I just think that's a great mantra. The other thing is I think scaling is a very long-term endeavor. So you need marathon runners. I'm a New Yorker, so maybe that's the metaphor that's in my mind from last weekend. But board, your investors, and your staff have to realize that this is going to be at least a decade, if not 2, to reach your goals. And an appreciation for, I think it's worse to go into a community or a school and then leave after 2 years than to have never entered, because so many of the communities in which we work have that traumatic experience of services, partnerships, and initiatives that come in and come out all the time. So really, really taking time with due diligence and knowing that you have the wherewithal financially in terms of your human capital and leadership to stay even when the local operations are not covering themselves. If it requires, you can say, well, they have to be self-sustaining in 3 years. We have this. Our cost model is that the revenue will be from our headquarters, 75% year 1, 50% year 2, 25% year 3. By year 4, they'll be self-sustaining. I have not had a grantee where I've seen that happen anywhere. So really understanding that the ability to become self-sustaining with local resources probably takes about, I'd say, 10 years. I don't know if Lindsay has or that's just a question in terms of the must-haves.
No, I think Lindsay would love to hear your sort of must-haves for success as well.
Sure. I think these comments have been spot on, and especially Dara's last comment about sometimes it's worse to enter a community and then leave than to never have gone there in the first place. When we were expanding into a really tough neighborhood in Washington, I did a lot of listening and interviews, and one of the residents explained to me that their neighborhood was the land of broken promises. And I wanted to make sure that higher achievement would never break our promise to that neighborhood. And we haven't. We've been there for the long term. So a few things I wanted to just add to the conversation. First is that as we've evolved our strategy, we want to make sure that we are not pushing higher achievement into a community, but we are being pulled. And we do have that demand that is pulling us into new communities, into new schools, into new cities. And we want to make sure that we're tapping into that demand in the marketplace. So we've made a few tweaks to our program model in order to make sure that it's meeting the needs of schools, which actually opens up a new revenue stream for us. School-based funding, as well as corporate sponsorships at the site-based level that are really powerful, mutually beneficial cycle for volunteerism and branding, as well as longer-term financial sustainability for higher achievement. As we open new centers and new cities, we also strive to have 2 years of funding up front before our board votes on that expansion. And so while it's never perfect, as Dara points out, the formulas often vary, that we really do strive to have those commitments up front before we would expand, so we would not break promises. And often it's 3 years. I think the last two things I'll share are two key tools that we developed over the last couple years that have helped us with sustainability and program effectiveness. The first is a real performance dashboard that directly plugs into our finance system and our program management system, our data program outcomes. And it allows that data to get linked and to be available and fully transparent to our frontline staff. So we are looking at cost per scholar on a monthly and quarterly basis at the frontline staff level, so that our staff members can see, when their scholars don't sign for their meals at night, we're actually leaking revenue opportunity there. Very specific things that we can titrate to make sure that we are fully maximizing our efficiency. It also gets to the question of how our staffing model differs across centers. It's raised really key questions internally and has prompted a real resurgence of excitement around using data to drive outcomes, not only grade and test score and attendance improvement, which was always available and used at our program level, but also the financial data, which was previously fairly opaque to the frontline program staff, but was mainly managed by finance and executive directors and development staff. So being able to open that up to everyone and have really structured conversations on monthly and quarterly intervals has really transformed our culture. And I think actually allowed staff the opportunity to grow professionally. The second and final tool that I'll share is a really clear reserve fund policy. It probably sounds fairly prosaic, but it was essential for our organization to establish a really clear board designated reserve fund that lined up the incentives for our cities to raise more than their annual operating costs to contribute to that reserve, and be able to know that portions of what they've raised in each city would be available in the future, and then another portion of it will be available. More detailed questions on that, but it is a very important sort of behind the scenes tool that is essential for our sustainability.
I just want to add one thing about the performance management dashboard that Lindsay referenced. Not only has she empowered all levels of the staff, including line staff, by being able to crosswalk in real-time program data with cost data and participation data, but there are even staff reports in which they've used this data in their communication with families and really explaining, for instance, if you're not encouraging your student to come on a regular basis, and we have basically empty seats, that means that inefficiency is creating a loss of opportunity for other young people in the community. And really being able to say, by them coming only 2 days a week as opposed to 4 days a week, that's costing us $4,000 as opposed to $2,000. And that's a responsibility that should be shared. So it's been very, very empowering, that performance dashboard.
And just from our perspective, to hear excitement and finance and program and dashboards in one sentence is pretty exciting for us. So we'll have a special set of questions for you on that, Lindsay. Thank you. As we think about this question of national versus field, when we work with other consultants who are helping organizations that are on a scaling trajectory, I know I have a colleague who says, we've got to get this right between the field and the national office. We're supposed to be working together. And so any words of advice on that would be helpful. So the next set of questions is about this question of national, central sort of support office and the field and how that relationship grows. And so my introductory comments, I talked about which comes first. It's a little bit of a chicken and egg. So the local office needs support from the national office. The national office exists for the purpose of supporting the field. So how do we organize that in the most successful way? So I'm actually going to start with Lindsay and ask the question about the sort of order, what comes first, and also any strategies around governance. So we have staff, we have leadership, we have boards. How do we all work together to go from that wonderful 5-6 year growth capital expansion phase to an organization that in the long term has this healthy balance between national and field offices? Lindsay?
It's a very big question, Hilda.
You can start anyway.
And I'm happy to give my first attempt. So first is, I believe that you need to start with program. You need to test your hypothesis and show that it's working in certain different scenarios, not just in one school setting, or in our case, but in multiple settings in a couple different locations. And if there proves to be demand for growth, then I think really honing the infrastructure is important, and to be very careful not to overbuild the infrastructure, but to build it gradually as there is demand at the local level, and with an eye to the future. But one thing that I think we ran into trouble was that we were building the infrastructure for 5 years down the road, and we could afford it 5 years down the road if our growth trajectory assumptions were true. But when you got to 2 and 3 years down the road, the growth wasn't there yet, and we couldn't pay for the infrastructure we had built. So I think it's a gradual sort of toggle back and forth, program improvement, testing the infrastructure, building the infrastructure for the year and 2 ahead. On the question of governance, I think really being clear, Dara mentioned this earlier about sort of what is fixed and what is flexible. There should be a very core model of what is standard, what we believe drives impact. I think Andrew had mentioned that, either Andrew or Sam. Not just understanding that you have impact, but what is it that you're doing that is driving that impact, and that those key elements should comprise sort of your core model, and those should be relatively fixed. But really being humble and understanding that every community is different, every setting is different, and having areas where you can be flexible to the local context is really important. And it's much more, I think, of an art than a science, and that constant evaluation cycle gets it to be, it moves it towards the science, but it's going to constantly be in that balance. I think the relationship, the human relationship between the central office and the, in our case, sort of affiliate city offices is incredibly important, just to build trust and mutual understanding, really making sure from our perspective that our national central office is in a customer service function and really gets to know the affiliate staff as people, so that we're building real trust, because when you're managing services and partnerships remotely, it can feel transactional. And for at least for higher achievement, and culture was mentioned earlier, culture is incredibly important to our programmatic outcomes. It's also incredibly important for the way that we run our organization internally, and the way that we run our board. You asked about governance, and one of the things I really took on as I stepped into the CEO role a couple of years ago is making sure that the culture was lined up from our middle school, after school and summer programming, to our offices, sort of our full-time staff culture, to our board culture. The previous two had been aligned, but our board culture was not quite aligned a couple years ago, and we've made real strides in that area. And want to make sure that every a city where you operate is has a sufficient voice in the governance and decision-making of the organization.
Thank you, Lindsay. And I'm going to ask you, Sam, as someone who's built infrastructure, right-sized infrastructure, any thoughts on the order? Is it linear? Are there retries? What's been some of that experience for you?
Yeah, definitely. The infrastructure question is in the notes Hilda said, is it the chicken or the egg? And I think to the end of time, just like getting your kids to make up their bed, is which comes first. Before I did get to that, I just want to give what I think are a few cautions from my world around just some of the things that have been said so far. And so as you begin to think about local versus field control, and so we've looked at it, and we looked at it both ways, and it's not because Andrew and I are control freaks or was control freaks. As we begin to look and dive and collect our data, one of the things that we harken back to, if for all of you hip hop or West Coast hip hop aficionados, there was a rapper at one point called DJ Quick, and he did a song. He said, things are bad in Compton, and he began to travel around. And he was like, Oakland is just like Compton, Baltimore is just like Compton, Detroit is just like Compton. And as we began to provide our programs, the politics are a little bit different, the funders are different, but what we found was that our kids in the urban city in Oakland, they're just like they are in LA. They're just like they are in San Jose. They're just like they are in Detroit. And so if you have come up and you have strategically measured your program to understand what works and what your non-negotiables are, be careful and don't let people in the nation of LA, that's what I call it, tell you that they're all so different. Because when you really begin to dig into it, it is pretty much the same. The second thing I will say for all of the data geeks out there, and I do consider myself one of those data geeks, but one of the things that I used to always tell Andrew and others is data is like money. The more you get, the more you want. Sometimes you may not be using all that you have effectively. That is true for money as well. My wife will tell you I waste quite a bit of it. So, and what I'm saying is don't be on a drive to collect data just to collect data. Understand what is going to be used for, how are you going to use it, and it's not saying don't be curious, but there's somebody on the other end who's collecting all of that data that has to do with your curiosity, and they only have 40 hours a week. Maybe you can stretch them to 45. So if you're going to collect more, then that means something else has to go. And that was a conversation we always used to have, is that, okay, you want more, Tell me what it is that we don't need to collect anymore. So we built the infrastructure piece. We built infrastructure first and said we want to build it for where we're going to be, and we will actually grow into that. And a lot of that was because we had both worked in organizations that did it the other way. And what we saw was that infrastructure never caught up to program. And those organizations are continuing to struggle today to help infrastructure catch up to program. One of the things that we realized when we were going through our business planning was even at the size that we were, we didn't actually have enough infrastructure to take care of what it was that we were doing at that present time. We learned really quickly when we essentially lost a $2 million grant how important it was to have the right people and the right systems in your finance department. We understood that the absolute hard way. And so we decided that we're going to build it with the talent, the infrastructure, and then we will actually grow into that. A lot of that also has to do with your cost model and how are you actually projecting your revenues and where your revenues are going to come from. Because as you grow into that, if you're giving people a all-in cost today of this dollar amount, and as you build infrastructure, your cost continues to increase, they're going to begin to look at you in a different way versus you give a cost now, and as you grow, your cost decreases. That is a different story to tell. And so again, this may differ, but it is about what we learned at first place and the way that we approached it, not the way that everybody should go.
Thank you for that. The last one of the last aspects of the conversation is this partnership between the grantee and the foundation. And one of the things Sam said early on was that funders want to hear what goes wrong as well as what goes right. And the story of higher achievement and the Wallace Foundation is a real tribute to the partnership between a foundation and a grantee. There were periods in the financial history of higher achievement where things were quite challenging. And one of the really important elements of this conversation is when someone is willing to share when things don't work and share how the turnaround happened so that others can benefit from that story. So I'm really appreciative that Lindsay agreed to share some of those not so positive moments for the development of higher achievement and where they are today. And so the financial challenges that higher achievement faced during a period of time could have been the end of the relationship between the organization and the Wallace Foundation. But it turned out not to be that case. It actually turned out to be the very opposite. It strengthened the relationship for the organization and the foundation. And so, Lindsay, if you could share a little bit of how what really at the time may have felt to be a crisis, how that crisis turned into a very strong partnership between the organization and the foundation.
Sure, thank you, Hilda. And I definitely just want to echo that. It did feel like a crisis in April 2012 as I stepped up from leading the DC Metro office of higher achievement to the CEO role. And Dara had a visit just, I think, 2 or 3 days after I stepped up into this role, and there was a lot of sort of turmoil happening within the organization. And I had a lot of honest conversations with our board, followed by some very honest, transparent conversations with Dara as our program officer. And I approached this with clear transparency, but also a lot of preparation, making sure that we were prepared for that visit in April 2012, and that each of our follow-up conversations, which for a while were every other week, we were very prepared. We knew what we were going to share with Dara, what key questions we wanted to ask her, because she has such an amazing wealth of experience and a vantage point to see many other organizations who face some similar challenges to what we faced. And I carefully walked the line between transparency and sort of overloading Dara with all of my anxiety about the turnover or turnaround at Higher Achievement, and that was an important line for me to walk. And you know, I think in asking for her advice, was able to really craft a much stronger strategy for Higher Achievement. We ended up doing a very clear restructuring of the national office and downsizing of the national office very soon after I stepped into this role, in order to make sure that our organization was financially strong at the end of our fiscal year. And then a few months after that, we stepped into a new strategic planning process to really look ahead at, okay, this is the work we did several years ago for our growth plan. What makes sense now? Where is the education landscape moving? What's Higher Achievement's role within that landscape, and how does that align to our mission, values, and vision? And so really spent a lot of time working with Dara, as well as other Wallace grantees with whom she connected me, to question a lot of our assumptions and push Higher Achievement to become much more sustainable and much more relevant in the school marketplace. And so wanted to pause there and also ask Dara to weigh in about that experience.
What was it like on that first phone call, Dara?
Well, I was increasingly anxious for months leading up to my first meeting with Lindsay. So actually, I think the fact that there was change that was going on by that point in time, my anxiety was going down and her anxiety was mounting. I mean, first of all, what I think made us like stay for the long haul was, you know, if a plan doesn't change, it's probably not being implemented. So for a funder to be like, well, 24 months ago you said you would serve 10,000 kids, and now it's only 860. What's going on? I mean, it's like, really? Like, things change, you know? Like, so really understanding that, like, a plan needs to evolve. It needs to be a living document. It needs to change. But it needs to not also be something that, you know, you're just throwing your milestones out the window. I mean, you have to be serious, you have to be earnest, and you have to be able to say, if something didn't work, why, and what are you doing about it? And Lindsay was able to do that from the get-go. I feel like her and her staff, it's really, a lot of times it comes down to the people. I mean, they kept their eye on the prize, and I feel like they love children. And that's manifested in the fact that they hold the young people that they work with to very high standards, and they hold themselves to very high standards. Organizations like Citizen Schools is the same way. I mean, man, are they rigorous and really tough on themselves on a lot of levels. So, and that also manifested with the board. I mean, frankly, a lot of nonprofit boards are comfortable riding in the red for many, many fiscal cycles, and it's just kind of deficit-based financial management is almost a norm. So the fact that they were unwavering in their commitment to get in the black in a very relatively short period. I mean, they turned around their financial standing in a very short period of time. I thought it took a lot of guts, and I appreciated their kind of fiscal prudence. And Lindsay's leadership. I mean, not easy in your first week as CEO, hiring more than half your staff, many of whom you've worked with for many years. So that was really tough. And when they were doing those things, they were doing it really thoughtfully. One of the positions that she held on to was around program quality and support. And she said, we might lose marketing. We're not losing our program staff because they have to be in the schools. You know, that's one thing we can't let go of. And it showed up. I mean, their quality assessment and my site visits during that period, I didn't see any impact on the ground. I mean, things were like crazy on their books, but the programming was still really, really strong. And then lastly, I think the other thing that made me not kind of back away from the crisis was our work actually with Fiscal Management Associates since 2009. We had been working in partnership with cities to increase the quality of after-school services, really kind of like a public policy effort. And we learned early on in that work, as you push for more rigorous standards around quality and scale, if you don't take care of the organizational capacity of the provider community, it's a recipe for disaster. You have to invest in infrastructure. So we worked with FMA to do some research initially in Chicago and New York of some of the most reputable, largest, and long-standing youth-serving organizations, and found, zero cash reserves, sometimes maybe up to 3 months, no lines of credit when you have over 50 public contracts and reimbursements are not coming in for like a while. And folks, and research that we've done as we've continued to work with them in our Strengthening Financial Management Initiative over the last several years have found, a typical underappreciation of the true cost of services. So being able to really understand cost and differentiate revenue and their prospects. That was one of the things that we worked on a lot during those biweekly calls, was when I was saying, well, how much money is coming in? What were the controls that were defining it? Because if it's just a very good conversation with a funder where you submitted a proposal, don't tell me about it. Like, only tell me about it once, like, the contract's executed, basically. So those were the type of things that we worked with, during that period. Our work with FMA has resulted in a website, I have to do a shameless plug, called strongnonprofits.org. So a lot of the lessons and tools and research findings from that work in Chicago is on that website.
Thank you, Darren. And so it is a happy ending, which is, of course, wonderful to hear. Andrew, from a place of partnership and from a place of advice to other funders who may be thinking about, do I take the risk? How do I take the risk in supporting scale for grantees? Well, what are some closing thoughts for you on behalf of the foundation and yourself in terms of fostering those partnerships?
Since you were not going to hand me the mic, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I heard a TJ Quick reference, I'd be donating to Tipping Point, not working for it. It's good to hear that he's still in the mix. So, I think a couple things, but kind of to back up a little bit, and there's a lot of people and familiar faces, and Tipping Point's model, but to back up a little bit and talk about that model, there's some really key elements to it. And one is we're about 100% impact, meaning our board underwrites all of our operating expenses. So every dollar we raise goes out the door in support of grantees. That support is in unrestricted general operating. And where that becomes, I think, really important is this question around infrastructure, which becomes the dirty word, infrastructure and systems, and how do you hire for that. And I think it's certainly not the wild, wild west, but folks should absolutely be unapologetic about the cost of their programs. And the pressure that you all feel I've been there, is unreal. And when I was at First Place, I remember having many conversations about how hard it is to manage public dollars coming in, particularly when you have a government that can't make a budget on time. How is it that you close these gaps? I remember having those conversations, and I remember Sam saying, I'll go to Tipping Point. To come full circle and be working at that organization now and actually see behind the scenes that that's a reality is really amazing and extremely humbling for me. But that general operating unrestricted dollar is unbelievably important. The other part of our partnership is we have management assistance. And last year we provided $2.4 million in strategic support for our groups. And that work is a department that we have that comes to strategic partnerships. And that work is partnering with best-in-class organizations from real estate to technology to program design to you name it, and providing that support to our groups. So I think it's about this idea of we want to be clear-sighted about what it is that you're driving towards. And what's really important to Tipping Point is you're spending time understanding your impact. And we also need to be nimble. We need to respond to issues because life happens as we lead it. That you have a bad HVAC system, you have to move locations, you need real estate help. An HR issue comes up, you need a new database. These things come up and we want to remain nimble, but we also want to be clear about, again, where the impact is, how you're going to drive to that impact, and make sure that we're aligning our support both dollar support and beyond the dollar support in a way that helps you drive towards that. But the thing I really want to emphasize from the model perspective is, again, don't be apologizing for the true costs of services. The clients that you are serving are unbelievably in need, and that costs money. So the clearer we are from our perspective about what that true cost is, the more helpful that we can be.
Sam, so just some closing words on the elements of success for that partnership, whether Tipping Point or any other funder who has been supporting you through this journey.
Definitely, as I said in my opening, the relationship that I've had with Tipping Point has been a really great relationship. I think, one of the examples of that is they are the actual reasons that I know FMA. The way that story happened is there was another grantee of Tipping Point, and she called over and she said, hey, I want to see if your financial staff could mentor my financial staff. And I said, wait a minute, before I send her over, what is it that they need mentoring around? And when we talked about it, what we realized is that we both had really great accountants. And that in the field, we have a lot of really great accountants that have the title of CFO. And that an accountant and a CFO is different. And as we went back to Tipping Point to say, here's one of the needs that we have, because we don't think we're going to get a ton of people that are CFOs in the for-profit sector to come over here and be CFOs here. We need to begin to give our really great accountants and our staff an understanding of how to take that financial information and disseminate it down to people who are laymen on the ground that are actually driving those budgets. And so that is a real life story, and that's the relationship. But I also want to say that a lot of it is not just about Tipping Point and the culture, it is the people who are there. So as I look around the room, I actually have other funders here, and I've had different relationships with those funders depending on the person that I talk to. We were a grantee that was known for having, 3 to 4 of these highly engaged funders. Those every other week conversations and phone calls. And people have asked me about that, and I said if the people that I worked with weren't the people that I worked with at those organizations, the relationships would be very different. And they're the people, and this may not be quantified, but there are people that I want to call, not because I have to, but because I want to. There are people that I want to be around and that we want to talk about the work that we're doing, not because it is on the agenda, because I want to. There are the people that if they weren't my funder and I ran into an issue, I would say, hey, what do you think about this? Can you give me some advice on this? And so in closing, that's the type of relationship, and it's, you can't measure it with the data. I know Tipping Point did this really fast, like give me feedback really quickly. I came out of a meeting with my program officer over there, and before I got to the elevator, I had, hey, fill out this survey. And I emailed her back. I was like, "Are you serious?" And so I know this may not be able to be quantified, but I think it is the nature of the relationship. It is the ability to have that true, authentic relationship. Because at the end of the day, in first place, the secret sauce is the relationship that we have with our young people. That's why they believe in us, not because we have rules or because we have metrics. It is we have a relationship, and they know that they can call us and get true, authentic answers. And that if we don't know, we're going to say, we don't know, but we're going to work to try to figure this out together.
Thank you.
I just want to add, I don't talk to Lindsay every other week anymore. It
was just during a period of time.
I'm not one of those funders, believe me.
I still have a couple of those.
So we have some time set aside for questions, and questions are coming from many different places. We have a few that were submitted before the program began. We have lots of folks on video listening to this, and they're submitting questions via Twitter. And we also have cards around the table, around the room. And so we also have microphones, and so we've got it all covered. The question is, anyone wants to begin with any questions from the audience here before we start taking any of the other questions? Any thoughts from the audience, questions? Okay?
For Sam, could you restate the size of the organization in the beginning and how fast the growth strategy was and where you are right now?
So I just want to repeat the questions for those who were not with us. So the question was basically restate the growth trajectory of First Place for You.
So when I started in about 9 years ago, we had a budget of about 1.4 million or so. Over the next 3 years, we grew from 1.4 million to about $8 million. In the last 6 years, we've grown from $8 million to $16 million. That 1.2 to 8, that was a real tough one. But we were able to gather ourselves and build that infrastructure to sustain that level of growth.
And Sam, just a follow-up question on that. The growth, that significant growth period, was it a partnership with a small group of foundations? Was it government? Was it a little bit of all? How did that happen?
It was mostly government. At First Place, again, I go back to our founding story is that we believe in really creating and changing systems. And so because of our advocacy work, because of the data that we were able to produce to actually say, an investment in these young people you get a return on that investment, we got government to pass specific legislation that actually, among other things, funded programs like First Place. And so that was the big fuel that growth over the next over those first kind of 3 to 4 years. What we didn't understand about that was what that also came with was just a tremendous more reporting requirements. And so when we began to look at the accountability for taking those government dollars, I think it was Bridgespan that wrote something like, actually to administer a government grant that you're really talking about close to like 60 cents on a dollar versus the 9.5% overhead that they actually allow you to claim.
And one of the things that Sam mentioned during some of our advanced planning was with this idea of connecting advocacy to fundraising. He said, we knew what we needed, so we didn't wait for the RFP to happen. We made it happen. We raised the awareness on the issue so that funders knew about the issue and took steps, and we were there to respond to the RFP. So I thought that sentence of don't wait for the RFP, but actually make it happen was pretty fascinating. Any questions, please?
Hi. Thanks for these presentations. Can you hear me?
We can.
So I was curious when you talked about one of the best forms of funding to have is unrestricted, so you can cover the overhead and the cost of doing business, all of that. So I'm curious, since individual donors are really the best source of unrestricted funds, I'm curious how much of your budgets, either organization, comes out of individual donors, and whether you raise money from the folks you serve as they progress, maybe after they've received their services and moved on.
Do you want to start with that, Sam? And Lindsay, we'll get you next.
So we definitely raise dollars from individual donors, and not as many as we would like to. And one of the things around trying to understand around an individual donor perspective is it takes an upfront investment, and are you willing to stay the course? It's because we've had conversations. Well, we're spending a whole lot of time to get $50,000 from 50 individual donors, when basically I can get on the phone in 20 or 30 minutes and do a couple of phone calls to foundations, and I got $50,000. And so, but we understand that there's an investment over time that actually makes that happen. But it's understanding what are those milestones that we actually need to do that. And so we really believe in a level of diversity in our funding, and with individuals being there. So the other thing is that we're not raising a ton of money from the young people that we have provided services to in the past. And so a lot of our young people, even though some of them are doing incredibly well, they're just like most Americans. They're living from essentially check to check. They come back, they volunteer. Andrew and I just had dinner the other night, and this was the highlight of probably my month. As we had dinner, we came down to the BART station. And we had just finished talking about all of these metrics and how we were going to measure and program design and changing data systems. And down the escalator comes this young man by the name of Richard. Maybe about 3 months ago, I had told Andrew about Richard when we were on BART strike. He rode the bus 2 hours just to get to class. And here he comes down the stairs, all suited and booted. It's like, hey, Richard, where are you coming from? He said, I'm coming from work. I'm working now as a teller at Wells Fargo. He is out of program, but he is still on his trajectory to actually get to where he's going. And I don't know how Andrew felt, but it made that conversation about the data and the metrics. I didn't pay him to be there either. I couldn't have made that great of timed investment. But all of that was worth it, and it brought it back to reality around what it was that we were talking about.
Thank you. Lindsay, do you want to add on the individual donation area?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's actually a very timely question for me. I was just having a conversation with our Director of Communications about our annual appeal direct mail that goes out on the holidays. So right now, we are also not getting as much as I'd like from individual donors, and I know that that is the most elastic and durable source of funding. Something like 70% of philanthropy in our country comes from individual donors. And so we're starting to get serious about it because next year is our 40th and it's a huge opportunity. And we are planning to go through the Benavon model training. I don't know if folks there are familiar with that, but it's something that I think holds a lot of promise and is a structured way to cultivate and increase the individual donor base. We also see that as a way to re-engage with our 40th higher achievement alumni. We have alumni who are in their 40s and a little bit older, and folks who are in really strong places in their careers. And a lot of them are donors. I don't have the exact numbers, but wanted to share another example, just an anecdote. One of our scholars who graduated from higher achievement maybe 10 years ago, went on to Stanford University and moved back to Washington after graduating from Stanford. And as we were opening that center that I mentioned earlier, that someone described the neighborhood as the land of broken promises, that was Tariq, my scholar's neighborhood. And he came back as we were opening that, became one of our mentors in that neighborhood, recruited so many Stanford alumni to mentor at that center that at a party once, he was recruited to become a higher achievement mentor from a friend of a friend, which I thought was an interesting anecdote. He then moved back to San Francisco. He's now working at Razorfish, so he might be someone that you all bump into in the Silicon Valley. And he has just joined Higher Achievement's National Board of Directors. And he's been a donor since college. He's been giving us $10 a month since college, and now gives us much more as a professional, and is an incredible champion, and is helping us figure out our alumni donor strategy for the anniversary.
Hilda, just one more.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Lindsay. Incredible story, and just one more plug for FMA. As people think about
I didn't pay.
the individual donor piece, when we were going through the FMA workshops, they actually gave us an article that I think was also from Britspan that talked about what type of organization are you? What really is your funding model? And that metric should tell you if you are going to appeal to individual donors. That there is a type of organization that appeals to individual donors, and then there's a type of organization that does not. And you have to understand what type of organization that you are to understand if you're really going to appeal, because you can spend a whole lot of money chasing that golden egg, reading all the hymns and the Cave Sprinkle Grace books and all of those things, and you may not be that type of organization that really appeals to individual donors in a huge and big way.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, hi, my name is Tom Wilson. I'm with Canal Alliance in San Rafael. And we enjoy a collaborative relationship with Tipping Point and are very proud of that and very happy to have that relationship. That sort of relationship with funding sources is relatively new. And there are, believe it or not, some foundations that it's not quite as easy to talk about our problems and our needs. And so maybe you could speak a little bit about what we can do to help to build that kind of a collaborative relationship with funders.
Who's going to jump to that?
I'll jump in. Hi, Tom. I think that there's only so much I think you can do, because I think that if you're doing all the things that you need to do, if you have strong finances, if you have good impact, if you're doing the things you're being asked to do, and they just don't have that relationship, they're not interested in it. I actually think that the question, I would phrase it a little bit, and actually, what is it that Tipping Point can do? What is it that the funding community can do? One of the things that we struggle with a lot is this idea around, and I'm sure everyone experiences it, that you get asked for 15 points of data around kind of one, and it could be one. How is it that we make that simpler for you? And how is it that we can begin to have conversations with our peer funders around how do we streamline this process for you? I also think that the idea of philanthropy being a field that's going to come in and say, look, we're really, really interested in what's broken. Being new to the field, I mean, I would love to think that's where we're going to go and what we're going to do. It really appeals to me because, quite honestly, anyone who spends time with me, I'm much more interested in what's broken than what's working. That's how you really begin to push forward with learning. But I think it really has to begin with a little bit of a groundswell within philanthropy itself, because, again, Tom, I know the work that you guys have been doing. I know that the struggles you have gone through. I know the challenges you've had and the wins that you've produced. And if folks aren't still willing to go, wow, great, tell us what's not working now so we can begin to partner with you to see more wins. I don't necessarily know if it's always on the provider. It's on us too.
I'm so glad you said that, because I really do believe it's on us. And I think working with those funders that you feel like have an approach or a culture that is worth sharing, and encouraging them to play like a peer leadership role in their community. Every city has a regional grant makers association. We have our field associations like the Center for Effective Philanthropy, GEO. Depending on what you fund, there's other organizations, like I'm a member of Grant Makers for Education, and really asking them to have candid dialogues and share their experiences in terms of why it's important to fund unrestricted support, or why it's, how you deal with challenges, and why it, just kind of acclimating other funders to different approaches, I think is really very powerful. I think peer learning is indispensable, and there's an increasing number of venues within our field to do that, both online and in person.
Sam, would you like to add anything to the?
Very quickly, a couple of things from the provider side. I'll share one of my fundraising secrets is that if you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. And so people actually want to dig in and do that work with you. The other thing the side that I will actually put on the foundation side is I've been sitting here thinking about the relationships that I enjoy the most and the people that I dig in the most with around this. I would say probably about 80 to 90% of them have actually done the work. They've been in the CEO chair and they understand what the struggle is. They've been in the program director chair and they understand what the struggle is. I have one of my best staff actually came from one of our funders, and they wanted to get a promotion there, and they said, no, you need to go out and do the work. And now she has a very different appreciation of when she was asking people for, well, we need you to do evaluation in 3 years. She has a different appreciation of what it was that she was asking for, and if she's on the other side, she's probably not going to ask for that again. And so I think there's a piece of of a groundswell of people who've been in the work that allows us to have a more candid and authentic conversation with, because they understand the struggle.
Lindsay, want to make sure if you want to add
Yeah,
anything?
I would just echo that from my own personal experience also, moving from a program officer position to, at first, a director of development position at Higher Achievement was illuminating and was really important. I think the only thing I would say to the person who asked the question is that as you gradually sort of are building trust with funders, I've found that it's helpful to kind of step forward and be courageous enough to share, this is what's working, and this is what's not working, and this is where I could really use your help, and be confident enough to push back at times. I do think there's a lot of potential for foundations to talk to each other to have philanthropy become more responsive. But I think there's also a role for nonprofit leaders to be courageous and to ask some hard questions to our funders as well, and have it become more of a two-way street. Of course, you have to tread lightly, but I do think that if we both step towards the center, we're going to be in a better place.
Thank you. Any other?
So we have an anonymous viewer. They're asking, how does a leader know when it's time to stop growing and when you've reached the right size?
So we're going to direct to the CEOs on that question. So just to repeat it, make sure everyone heard it. When does a leader come to the conclusion that we're in the right size and we've grown enough, or is there that magic moment?
I would just chime into something that Sam said earlier around knowing what your end game is. For Higher Achievement, the terminology we use is, what is our bold goal? And when we've achieved that bold goal, we should stop growing. And for Higher Achievement, it's that by 2030, we want all students in the cities where we operate to graduate from high school ready for college. If we hit that earlier, I will be very happy, and I'd be happy to have this continue without Higher Achievement or to sustain at that level. But I think it's really clear, you need to be clear as a leader what the end game is in order to know when to stop growing. But a cue to pause growth is also if you are in a financially untenable position, needing to pause and reevaluate and get things in order before growing again. Or if you get to the point on the flip side, if program quality is slipping, it's another important point to say, let's pause, reflect what's working, what's not, make sure that we're not growing for the sake of growth, but making sure that we're staying with our eye on the ball of impact.
Thank you.
Ditto, and I would also ask the anonymous person that if you haven't solved the problem, is the stop more about you are tired versus the organization has reached its full potential?
Thank you. I saw a microphone. Yes.
Hi, everybody. I was curious, we talked a little bit about unrestricted operating support as one funding strategy for organizations going through a period of growth. I'm wondering if there's any other strategies that you as funders think about, whether you practice that or whether it's something you're thinking about, as well as what organizations feel like they need to go through that period. I know in my organization we think a lot about revenue versus capital and how you can best invest in growth. So whether it's kind of investing in kind of maybe funding those operating deficits you might see while you're going through that period of growth, or whether it's contributing to an operating reserve, or what are some of the things that you think would be helpful and that you consider as funders?
Well, thank goodness there are funders that fund unrestricted and general operating support, and there should be more of them. So that's a long strategy. But I mean, I think, for instance, we didn't do that, but in some respects it was kind of unrestricted-like, because we didn't ask for a proposal, we asked for the strategic growth plan, and we were investing in their organization's growth. So while the grant agreement was pretty prescriptive in the sense that there were specific goals, activities, milestones, etc., some of those goals and activities were related to, the development of a management information system, or a third-party evaluation, or a performance metric might be adding 3 board members with X, Y, and Z skills. So there are ways to kind of be restricted but still support infrastructure. And I think also really in terms of the point about understanding the true cost, not being shy around indirect and really kind of thinking about what it takes in terms of IT and HR and R&E and the other kind of back office functions to really operate effectively at scale and to bake that into your direct service delivery expenses and then really explain it. I would hope. I mean, a lot of funders still balk and are like, oh, it's still X thousand per person, but I think increasingly there is more literature and more sensitivity to the true cost of service, quality service.
I echo those comments. I think, although not related specifically to growth, but the idea of what are some different ways of thinking about funding. I think we are interested in PRIs, program-related investments. I think we're spending a lot of time trying to understand performance-based contracting and social impact bonds. Like how that helps with growth is not obviously not going to be very helpful. But I do think that the lens that I would put on it is, and this might not be a very popular stance coming out of philanthropy, but sometimes you have a really great plan and the timing's all wrong, and you might have some money in the reserves, maybe not enough, but you've got a great solution, and the problem is intractable, and sometimes you got to quit talking about it and be about it. Sometimes you got to take a flyer on what it is you think you can do, because when expansion comes up and you got to go into a different area, a foundation might say, that's really great, that sounds awesome. Can you get some boots on the ground and some public money, and then we'll come give you some foundation money. And I think that it's about your appetite for risk when it's about growth and when it's about replication. Because there's many times, I recall at First Place, where there was an opportunity to grow. We weren't quite codified with the model into Los Angeles, which was a place we wanted to be, and we said no. We said that funding stream will come back around again, and guess what? It never did. And we had to go down there and try to raise $3 million. I think we went down there with $250,000. And we had to float it out of our reserves. And it was approved by the board. It was extremely risky. I remember writing the proposal to try to bring in $2 million. It was extremely stressful. But the message is that if you believe in what it is that you have to offer, get it out there, get it, and figure out a way to make it happen. I know that's not the question you asked, but I felt it important to add.
I would just add, again, part of what we are very strong advocates for is the creation of operating reserves. And it is the creation of risk capital and funds that you have available for whatever comes up. And so I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts there, which is during this replication strategy, I think Lindsay mentioned 2 years of funding in advance. She also talked about operating reserve policies that the board put in place in terms of how much they could dip into those reserves during the expansion period. So part of laying that groundwork for the expansion is having that safety net for when that funding doesn't come in as you expected. We have time for just that one more question, and then for those of us who are here together, we can continue the conversation. And for those of us who have joined us, we will certainly be happy to answer any other questions after today. One last question.
Hi, Isla Malik from Fly. I actually have two, and I'm going to see if I can just slide them in.
Go for it.
So one of them is about... the Isla, I didn't ask two. One question is about, we talked a lot about cost per kid, and I think in the last question, Sam, you alluded to kind of cost per service. And I was wondering if the panel could talk a little bit about culturally as a sector, how we need to shift from cost per kid to cost per outcome, and whether that shift has do you do that shift before you go to scale, or can you do it during? Like, how does that shift of helping people understand that the service and the outcome eventually is going to cost a significant more amount, sticker shock more amount than what we're used to for cost per kid, and kind of playing down on the cheap kind of thing. So that's the first question. The second question was related in the sense that, Lindsay, you had mentioned that you had raised, the model in many of your jurisdictions was raising about 2 years worth of funding before you scaled. And then Andrew, I like that you had mentioned there's some risks in LA where we didn't have anything really and sort of went for it. And I was wondering, from Fly's perspective, there's a big tension between what does it really cost to get to the outcome, so the program staffing that's needed to really get that outcome so that you can attract more dollars when you're in that jurisdiction, versus trying to lessen the cost of those services or that outcome to be able to say, oh, we have 2 years committed and sort of lessen the financial risk, but then you really suffer, you sacrifice something on the ramp-up time, the outcome time, target population time. So this whole tension around, it all stems to cost per kid, cost per outcome, and pacing of scale.
I can start. I mean, that is a very classic Isla set of questions right there. So I think a couple things. One, first, I think it's helping organizations get out of the shock of constantly having to talk about the cost per kid, right? And that is a place that's really hard to move people out of. But that's a race to the bottom. I mean, I've said that so many different times. But if you're getting ready to replicate or grow, and you don't have a really clear sense about what you think your true costs of your program are and what it is you think it's going to take to get that outcome, I think there's more work to be done before you're ready to replicate. Because I think that oftentimes, too, when we have home offices, we get used to, and I don't mean this in a bad way, we get used to the comfort of the home office. That sometimes we have positions that are there because they've developed over time, or because a staff person's been there for 15 years, and we create positions for them that aren't really going to be necessary as you replicate. And we're in the age of technology. There are many, many things that can be done through technology that we might not necessarily need in our replicated sites. So for example, training, onboarding, retention of the top high-level talent is absolutely critical. Can you put all your trainings on YouTube and let them actually go on YouTube and look at those and actually pace themselves through a level of training? Can the onboarding be thought of in a different way? Because we talked a lot about culture, and I agree. And I was just remarking with a colleague the other day about the old expression that culture eats strategy all day long. And if you're not needs to replicate, and what's actually okay for a satellite site to actually take on a slightly different rhythm or slightly different pace, as long as the core elements of your culture remain, I think there's some interesting ways to play around there. But I think the first place is helping leaders and people that are so used to that idea of what's the cost per kid to move out of that realm and begin an education with their funders on it.
I would just like to add in, it's a really important question. It's one that we've tried to get out with our performance dashboard, the cost per student or scholar in our case, or cost per impact. I don't have a pithy answer if you ask what's higher achievement's cost per impact, but by looking every month at the finances and the program outcomes, we can look at, when we adjust different staffing models, or when we hire staff who are, have more years of experience or at a different quality level, how our impacts drive or respond to that. It's allowed us to really become much more efficient. So in the year that we have fully used this new model, our cost per student has come down by about, maybe it's a year and a half of using the model, it's about 27% decline in the cost per scholar, which is big. And we've increased the number of students we've served, which has driven that cost change substantially. Increased the number of students by about 20%. And importantly, our academic outcomes throughout that main school year have increased by 17%. And so if you put all those together, you get closer at sort of cost per impact. Your question around sort of having the 2 years of funding up front, higher achievement has perhaps a lower risk tolerance than some organizations, and we want to make sure that we grow and we are sure that we are going to be there for the long term. So 2 to 3 years up front is what we aim for. It does mean that our growth trajectory is a little bit slower, but we feel more stable through that process, and making sure that that our commitment to our communities is at least the same as what we ask our scholars to commit to higher achievement, which is typically 3 years.
Okay, thank you. And Sam, did you want to?
So just, again, just a couple of cautions. This is the caution piece of it. One of them is, the cost per kid versus the cost for impact. First of all, I take this to my colleagues back on the stage. I think there have to be more foundations who actually care about that. And then if there are more foundations in private philanthropy that care about that, then we can actually drive government. I remember when David Hunter came out to help us build our initial ETO system, and he tried to build everything based on the outcome. And at that time I said, I got 2 funders that care anything about my outcome. I got a whole government system that cares about my widgets. And so until I can get everybody to care about my outcome, I got to have reporting around my widgets. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be very cautious, because if it costs too much, nobody cares. You can be as good as you want to be, have the greatest impact, but if it begins to reduce the return on investment, nobody's going to pay for it. There is a cost to put Jamal in jail. If the amount of money it costs to keep Jamal out of jail gets anywhere close to what it costs to incarcerate Jamal, it's much easier to incarcerate. There's a lot more people who make a lot more money off of Jamal. And so the thing is be very careful to don't get into this whole run, okay, I got to produce the outcomes, and the outcomes are going to be more expensive. Because if it costs too much, nobody cares.
On that note, thank you. So we're wrapping up this part of the program. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to thank all of you who have joined us nationally. I hope that this has been as engaging as a video streaming can be. For those of us who are here, please join us in our reception as we exit the auditorium. And for those of you at home, I know you're all over the time zone, so I hope you're up to dessert right now. And have a good evening, and thank you again for joining us. And I want to thank our panel for a wonderful sharing of ideas. Good night, Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
One last thank you. A thank you to Delancey Street Foundation.